Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of western North Carolina. This past week has been a whirlwind. This morning was no exception, taking care of all the last minute things. Of course, today's the big Hanuman ceremony. It's Hanuman Jayanti, Hanuman's birthday. And then tomorrow, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, is the Kumbhabhishekam. It's commemorating the founding of the Sri Someshwara Temple, which happened, a little over 12 years ago. It's done every 12 years, but it's been amazing. We're building. We repainted the inside and the outside of the temple, the steps going up, all the railing, fixing things, just fixing everything up, and but the main thing, really, I guess we're riding that wave, and we have all these different little stations. We have, of course, the flower shop, but then there's so many flowers for all the events coming up, all the things coming up. All the pundits are coming, and we're going to be having, 5 Havan Kunds, 5 yagyas going on at the same time, in the Yagyashala, the building where the yagyas are performed. And so that's going to be incredible. We've set up tents and chairs and everything for all the people. And so we have the flowers in the regular flower shop. Then we set up another flower shop temporarily in the house adjacent to the temple. And people have flown in. Even Cloudy flew in from Alaska. And so I've just been going from station to station, for the past days, just checking, making sure everything's all right, seeing if there's anything I can do. And there are always things to do, so it's been really busy. There's the kitchen, there's housekeeping, there's a physical plant, and Brian manages the whole outside. And I spent one whole day, running one of the lawnmowers, tractors, cutting all the grass, just because there's so much for everybody to do, But it's been so much fun, and it's been so amazing, and just the feeling. Hanuman, his birthday today. Hanuman, when they establish a temple in that, they establish one of the deities as like guardian of the temple. Kshetra Palaka, it's called, I believe. And Hanuman is that protector for Sri Someshwara. And it just feels like that devotional. Of course, Hanuman is the embodiment of devotion, And it just feels like that devotional quality, that, pure love quality is just permeating all of Mount Soma. Everybody is just, gosh, people are working hard, and they're getting up early in the morning and working until after dark, and just getting everything done, And but the feeling is so sweet, and everybody is so devoted and so dedicated, and that feeling is so all-encompassing and so lively, and so sweet at Mount Soma right now. So even though it's been really a lot of work for a lot of people, I'm actually humbled by so many of the people, because they're doing so much, But it's that feeling, I think, that's really been carrying us through, and making the whole thing just really an immersion in bliss, really. And so the things start today at 11:30, and then tomorrow with the pundits we'll be doing some things, and then Tuesday all day long it's Havans, and that's going to be great, And we're doing a Durga Havan that will last. I think they're anticipating around 5 hours. That'll be really powerful, So it's wonderful, It's wonderful. I wrote a little thing you can read. I don't know. It's in the podcast notes. And I'll just let you read that about Hanuman. And at any rate, what we're going to talk about today, inner and outer spheres of influence. Spheres of influence is a concept I've never heard it referred to with respect to the inner spheres of influence. So I think those are actually probably more important than the outer, but the outer spheres of influence are also very, very important. And the idea is that there are different spheres, like ripples coming out when you throw a pebble in the water, you know. And within each sphere, the inner spheres, closer to the center now, not to be confused with what I mean by inner sphere of influence, but the inner spheres of the outer spheres of influence are composed like the people that are closest to you, your immediate family members, you know, like that. And there's a dynamic that takes place there. It's a relationship, and it's intimate. It's very close. And around that, there's a sphere, kind of like, it's like a boundary. And those people are in the sphere of influence. And then the rest of the world is outside that sphere of influence. And that inner sphere of influence, the family dynamic is so critical. They talk a lot about it now in the news even, don't they? Because, you know, the family values and the family dynamic and how there's a feeling that it's being penetrated. Even some would say by the educational institution where the teachers, you know, tell the kids, don't tell your parents this, and kind of feel like they're equally parental or even more parental than the actual parents. So it's an invasion of that inner sphere of influence. That's one example. And then there's the next sphere of influence. You have anything you want to say about any of this, Scotty, so far?
No, not yet.
Okay. And then there's the next outer sphere of influence, which would be like close friends, people that you love and you're close with, but still there's one octave out, you know, one sphere out from that. And then it cascades out like that. You know, your friends that aren't quite as close, maybe where you work would be another sphere of influence out. And it goes out and out like that until it encompasses the whole world, you know. But where we get in trouble, I think, with respect to spheres of influence, first of all, is within a sphere of influence, there's a certain familiarity, and familiarity is good, but it can bleed over into, you know, taking advantage of, not giving it as much energy as it requires, you know. And let's face it, when we're home and we're relaxed, it's like, okay, time to let our hair down and not be too even attentive to the things we say, perhaps. Whereas really that inner sphere influence is the more important one, the most important one. But we sometimes tend to take it for granted too much, and it causes problems. You know, sometimes we don't say things exactly as they should be said because it just feels like it's too much work to really articulate ourselves and really be clear. But the problem with that is that if we're not careful, we say things a little too loosely, a little too flippantly, and that can hurt other people within the sphere of influence. Even neglect, not saying anything, can hurt. And so that creates a dynamic within that most intimate sphere of influence that is damaging to it, whereas it's the most critical, the most important sphere of influence that has anything to do with, you know, people that you relate to, people that you love, people that you're connected to. So that becomes one problem. Another problem is when the boundary that supports that sphere of influence, that's an important boundary. And it maintains the integrity, really, of the family unit, the family dynamic. And so if we hold that boundary in a healthy manner, not in a militant manner, I mean, but we appreciate it for what it is, and we appreciate its importance for what it is, then it strengthens that relationship. If you have kids, your relationship with your spouse and your kids, if even if you don't have kids, the two of you, maybe make up just only the two people make up the family unit. And that inner dynamic, that's the core. That's the most important part of your life. And you see what happens in the world today in particular is we oftentimes tend to, we look outside, we look to those outer spheres for our profession, for our work. I think we talked about this in the last podcast for our sense of self-actualization, perhaps. And what happens then is that our boundaries and our emphasis, that all starts to get misplaced and compromised. So it's important to remember that even though we're so busy with our work and it can take up all our time and it's so important, that's our source of income or our source of whatever, but it's important to never forget and to always have that touchstone of the inner sphere of influence, the family dynamic. And that is where real self-actualization comes from. So blurring these lines, these spheres, and even in, like, for example, in the work environment, you have a sphere of influence that's your work environment. And then there's the question about, do those lines become blurred? And our people, there's a certain, integrity and a certain quality of relationship that needs to be maintained there. And the integrity of that needs to be healthy. And so like that, we have all these different spheres of influence. And those are inner spheres of influence. Anything else to say about that before I go into the inner sphere, Scotty?
No.
Okay. So now there's a whole other sphere of influence, and it has to do with only one person. It's not about relationship with other people so much as it's just relationship with the self, your own individuality. And that is a sphere of influence where that has different spheres, doesn't it? There's the Atman, the seed that is one with Chaitanya, that place where you're one with the absolute, infinite, unbounded, eternal, the source of all life and existence, the source of your own individuality. And so that's where Chaitanya, the unboundedness of all existence, meets with the Atman, the point value, the seed of your whole individual being, that radiates out onto all the different spheres, all the different levels. And then there's another sphere of influence, still within the individuality. You have to have the Atman. And then what's the next one? We could call it the finest feeling level. The intuitive gut feeling level, that feeling where that's a level of feeling in the level of heart, but not emotional heart. That's more superficial. We're talking about the heart of your being, the heart of your existence. So those first two levels are the most intimate, the most crucial. And also, they're a level that many of us don't really live. We don't really know. It's because it's not about the finest level you're capable of feeling in the moment. We're talking about now that sphere, which is the finest level that it is humanly possible to feel. Once the physiology is refined so that we can feel on the deeper and deeper levels. And that's the real core. And you can see how that maps onto the outer spheres of influence and the innermost when they're being the family dynamic, you see? So the finest feeling level, the Atman, of course, the Atman isn't fully awakened to until liberation comes, until enlightenment comes. That's what enlightenment means, when that becomes fully awake. And then there's the finest feeling level. That's the level of where intuition is feelings, intuition, the intuitive felt sense, that sense of the distinction between even right and wrong. That's the seed of it. Like I say, we shouldn't really think our way through life. We feel our way through life. How does it feel? And too often then we blur that most intimate, most important sphere of influence within our own being. We blur that with a much more superficial sphere of influence, which is our thoughts. We do well to not just think our way through life, but to feel our way through life. And it's because you can think anything, you can have any thought, but it's your relationship with those thoughts that makes all the difference. You reject this thought, you reject that notion, or you embrace that other thought, that other notion. But how do you know which to embrace and which to reject? Which is truth and which is deception, really, of your own self? There's only one way to do that, and that's to feel into deeper and deeper, finer and finer feelings within your being, that deeper sphere of influence, so that they're integrated. They're not blurred, but they're integrated, you see? Just outside of that finest feeling level, the next level is the next sphere of influence, still dealing with the individual, is the emotions. And you can see there's quite a continuum of emotions. There are superficial emotions that might include passions or negative emotions. Even our emotions that we may think are most laudable, but that others might view as being, la la land, airy fairy, ivory towers sort of things. So there's a whole continuum of emotions there. And discernment then, real discernment isn't just an intellectual process. It's discerning the nature of those emotions and those feelings and getting to that as best we can, feeling into that finest feeling level, that deeper inner sphere where we are one with nature, our own true nature, which is one with Mother Nature, and we live more fully from that place. That's a rare thing. That's a very rare thing. Even enlightened beings, I know this may not line up with people's idealized notions, but the truth is that even enlightened beings, a moment here, a moment there, they can give way to a more superficial emotion. We're all human. Enlightened people are still human beings in at least one sense. And so that whole range of human emotions, you see, is accessible and is part of their life, part of their being. The difference is that kite that soars and spins in all different directions has a tail, so it doesn't spin so much. And that tail anchors it into that finest feeling level and the Atman level, you see? Great trees aren't meant to grow out of the ground like 2x4s. It's those complexities, those twists and things that give it its unique nature. People are like that. And then that we can talk more about the next level outside of emotional level is our thoughts. And our thoughts are something that so many of us do and feel they should run our lives. We try to think our way through life. We try to analyze intellectually, what's the right move here? What should I do? How can I be discerning? Mistakenly thinking that discernment is a function of the intellect, which is ridiculous. It's not. The intellect, when functioning properly, is an expression of that deeper level of discernment that comes right from the source of being, right from the Atman, right from the finest feeling level. But don't we get ourselves so confused? I mean, for example, just look at the news. Pick any topic. The topic of transsexuals and what's their right place in the world, or how should we relate to them, or the role of the educational system, or you name it. Anything in the news. What else? The government. On and on. We take a stand, usually based on a relatively superficial emotion or a half-baked idea, and then we live our lives in accord with that. It's no way to live. It's no way to live your life. There was a quote, let me find it here, about fear. Of all the liars in the world, sometimes the worst are our fears. And so many of our fears are what guide us through our life. I've compared it to if you're driving down a road and then you have to turn a bend, go around a bend. You don't know what's around that bend. But how many of us in the course of our life, because we don't really know everything that's around that bend, we don't proceed, we stop the car. But you never know. Life is full of bends and turns and twists. And if our fears guide us, we don't progress. It's important to put one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the next, and proceed. Do your best. And how do you do your best? Through discernment. So you see, it all comes back to that, the finest feeling level. And how do we access that? Well, reflection, self-reflection. I don't think many of us, it's not easy. I'm not sure any of us really know, how we function. And it's a funny thing because 10 of your closest friends, if you weren't around, could talk about how you function, and they get in the ballpark anyway. Probably better than you would on your own in some regards. But if you were to sit with that person and the person will tell me how I function, no, that's taboo. It's somewhere we don't go. It's too delicate. It's too subtle. We'd be just shooting from the hip anyway. And so you're left to yourself, really, to find out how you function. Even if you go to a therapist and talk to a therapist, well, they're quick to put you in a box, aren't they? They may not mean to, but they can't help it. Why? Because that's how human beings function, you see? But we do so well if you start to understand even your weaknesses as well as your strengths, your fears, what you do to feel safe, even though that may erroneously based on a superficial emotion of fear or programming of one kind or another. I actually gave a response to that quote. And I would say that of all the lies in the world, the worst are our own programmings, how we're programmed to think, how we're programmed to feel. And so much of it is programming, it's conditioning from childhood. And particularly the ones we wrongly believe we no longer serve. How many people, geez, even in my classes, people, oh yeah, I see what I'm doing. Yeah. And when they say, what do I do about it? I say, this is the doing. There's no doing about it. That's just putting a Band-Aid on it. You are who you are. But nevertheless, the more you see it, the healthier your relationship with it becomes, you see. So it's all about relationship with. But we get into trouble when we say, oh yeah, I used to be that way. I'm not that way anymore. You know why? Because in times of pressure, in times of challenge, that's usually what we fall back on. Even in our own spirituality, it's easy to be a very spiritual being when everything is going well. And it doesn't, it's nice. Don't get me wrong. I was going to say it doesn't mean anything or it doesn't mean that much. No, it means a lot. But what's really important and what's really the indicator, that's not really the right word, but I think you get the idea, is how you function in life when a challenge comes up. And one common example is money. What's your relationship with money? People have funny relationships with money, and it really reveals, in a lot of ways, their own spirituality because they're very spiritual, but when the buck gets involved, right away they become extremely material, even to a fault, for example. And of course, other people, they bail out of that one by saying, well, I don't care about money. I don't like money. Well, that's not a very healthy relationship with it either, is it? But whatever your relationship with money is, exploring that in times of pressure, not just theoretically or, oh, yeah, I read Be Here Now, and so I can say I'm beyond money. But when rubber meets the road, when you're really functioning, what's your relationship with money then? Giving things away, giving things, just giving. Really, there's no such thing. Because the idea I think people have of giving is that you give it, it's no longer yours. But the reality is, when you really give, it comes back. Manyfold, in fact. I just like giving. I like giving little things. I like giving big things. Most of the money I've made in the world, I've given away. I put everything into Mount Soma, really, just not everything, but the significant percentage. It brings fulfillment. It brings self-actualization. Selfishness is not about the true self. It's not about that inner sphere of the self, who you really are. Selfishness is all about that superficial material self. It's all a function of fear, conditioning, preconceived notions, programming, different words really for the same kind of thing. So what I'm really talking about here, when I talk about the inner sphere of existence, first of all, don't blur these different spheres. The intellect is a great tool. It's a lousy master. And when you try to use the intellect to determine who you really are down deep, what you really feel, what you really believe, you're kidding yourself. It's a lie. And it's a lie usually etched in stone for so many of us, just as a programming. It's just a programming. I'm not saying we proceed with reckless abandon. Quite the contrary. We reflect, we ponder, we really be self-honest with how we feel. And not just the feelings that might compel us to move forward, but perhaps even more importantly, I don't know, the feelings that hold us back, the feelings that prevent us from going around that corner, taking that turn. I used to collect coins. I don't anymore, but it's a cool hobby, I think. But anyway, my favorite coin was the 1793. Think about the time that was, right after the American Revolution. The 1793 large cent with a picture of Lady Liberty. Liberty, but it's Lady Liberty with the wind blowing through her hair. So all the long hair is going back and she's facing the wind. Face the wind. Face the wind. And who's facing the wind? That deepest, finest feeling level of your being and your willingness to stay loyal to it, commit to it, follow it, even though you don't know what's around the bend. We favor what is familiar, even over and above what is better. There's this common little story. I'll just give the bottom line of it. There was a hermit who lived in a hut. He had nothing. And then he was given a palace with all gold and everything. And now that's an analogy to enlightenment and our moving in the direction of enlightenment, the great palace in the sky, so to speak. But the hermit, with the thought of that, with the entry and movement in that direction, for a moment he thought to himself, I miss my hut. We all miss our huts. It's our conditioning. It's our programming. It's what's familiar. It's what we've become indoctrinated into, what we've indoctrinated ourselves into. And you can't take it with you. You can't take it with you, I remember once Maharishi said, the movement is for those who move. I liken it to the shedding of the snake, the skin of a snake, It's a rebirth, it really is, I like this Mother Teresa quote. Love begins by taking care of the closest ones, the ones at home. Well, now we're back to the outer spheres of existence and the most inner of those outer spheres. Mother Teresa was an enlightened individual, and there are very few. There was a famous Vaidya, a famous Ayurvedic doctor, really well known for his uncanny ability to do pulse evaluation. And he could tell from somebody's pulse if they were enlightened or not. And he said he went all through the world taking the pulse of tens of thousands of people and all of the greatest, saints and spiritual leaders in the world, all the gurus and everything. And he said of all of them, he only found 5 people that were actually enlightened. Only 5. Mother Teresa was one.
Michael?
Yeah, Scotty.
If we look at this, like, we're all born, or the impetus for us is born out of this God consciousness, this perfection, the infinite coherence. So we're born out of this. We come in as babies,
Yeah.
and then is that one of the purposes or whatever, is that we're kind of, it separates us from that God consciousness where we can't remember that everything is infinitely coherent, and we're just.
That brings us to the child of the wind.
Yeah.
Hanuman, born of Vayu. You see, I've mentioned before that there's 2 forces in nature. There's prana. What is prana? Prana is life breath. It's the breath, the source of which is the very breath of Chaitanya itself. That seed that births relativity. But within the dynamic of relativity, see, relativity by definition is relative, isn't it? It's no longer functioning within the field of pure unity, but now we're functioning in a field of diversity, where the knowledge, and I'm not talking intellectual knowledge, I'm talking the real knowledge, the direct experience of I am one with that pair of reading glasses, I am one with that camera, I am one with you. It's sensed. Those deeper spheres of influence are sensed, but they're not really clearly known. They're not fully known. They're beautiful notions, perhaps. And so then we enter into the field of karma, the field of, and what births karma? When prana interacts with action within relativity, action within the dynamic of the limitation of duality, separation, then our very being, our very life, the flow of our life becomes blown in the wind. And what's the source of the wind? Prana, life, breath. Nothing moves without that. Hanuman is the child of the wind, of Vayu. And the wind is the source of that life breath. Hanuman is the child of that. Hanuman then, on a very deep level, on that finest feeling level, he's fully awake that he lives from that place where he's in full love, in full devotion to what? Divinity, Lord Rama. So he's Lord that rides on the wind. We all ride on the wind, but being Lord of that, he's grounded, he's rooted in his everlasting devotion. And we're not talking about devotion on, when we go worship at a temple. It's much more than that. It's a living, functioning state that he embodies. And Lord Rama is everywhere. Lord Rama is everything. God is the source of everything. This is physics. We can say it that way if you have trouble with it otherwise. This is all just the absolute in its essence. So Hanuman lived his life in devotion of divinity. The Ramayana, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, all that, those aren't just stories about something that happened, though they did. It's much more than that. The Ramayana, Ramayana exists at every point in creation, eternally. The Mahabharata, every point in creation, eternally. So when Hanuman, being so fully devoted to God, to Lord Rama, carries that influence, lives a life in devotion and support and dedication to that. When they inaugurated the temple over 12 years ago now, they made Hanuman, and I think it's beautiful. The pundits did this. On their own, they did this. They made Hanuman like the official guardian of Mount Soma. And I just love that they did that. And it's so consistent with my own heart. I mean, living a life of devotion within the individual, it has to do with that finest feeling level and Atman. Within the spheres of outer influence, what does it have to do with? The home. People that on the deepest level of your life, you love. That's something worth pursuing. And once attained, it's something worth honoring and nurturing and sustaining and living in full commitment to. Full commitment. But with all the distractions and all the blurring, you see, that takes place between the different spheres of existence, it's easy to lose our way. Where all of a sudden our desire to make money or get a degree or pursue this or that, those things are good, don't get me wrong, but not to the point where they start to compromise devotion to that deepest value. And before you know it, we're caught up in realms that have more to do with playing Monopoly, money, or intellectual pursuits that are viable and worthwhile things, but not when we lose our balance. So have a home, nurture the home, feed the home, love your family, and don't get distracted. Have your outside interests, absolutely, but not to the point where you compromise that. And don't, so many out of fear, what's around the corner? And it takes work, A relationship within the family dynamic, it's not just commitment. Okay, I'm committed, good, I'm done. It's work. You're dealing with other people. They all have their own psychodynamic structures and all of that. And today is Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day. What does mother represent? I mean, we all have issues with our mothers in one way or another, don't we? But the essential nature, the Chaitanya value, the finest feeling level value, that which goes beyond personalities of individuals, be it our mother or whomever. But nevertheless, the source, like it or not, really. But that's why we love mothers. Our mothers is because they are regardless of what dynamics are going on the surface, at the very core of life is that value of mother. And today is a day where we recognize that and we celebrate that with our mother. I think Punjaji's favorite mantra for Mother Divine is Om Shri Matre Namaha. It's innocent. It's beautiful. It's pure, isn't it? The feel of it. Well, there are a lot of things that I just put in my notes. You can read them. I think they're pretty self-evident. It's under the category Current Events and Reflections. But I think for today, there's some great quotes there, but for today, I think we'll stop right here. I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and we'll talk with you again next week. And so here at Mount Soma, we are on to the festivities of the next 4 days. Thanks for listening.